In 3, 2, 1.
The Global Scale of English, or GSE Teacher Toolkit, is a free-to-use online search tool for quick and easy access to a wealth of GSE information. This information includes 1,600 learning objectives, 36,000 word meanings, and 300 grammar objectives, all of which have been given GSE values in collaboration with teachers around the world, so that you can see exactly what your learners should know at different levels of proficiency. This information will help you to plan lessons, create materials, report on progress, and give feedback to your students. Let's see some examples.
I use the GSE Teacher Toolkit for planning, for adding supplementary materials, and for assessment. So I went to the toolkit, I selected adult learners and models of obligation, and I could see precisely that between 30 and 36, that is A2 level, there are only 2 models of obligation, let's and shouldn't, and they appear at 34 and 36. For me, this is a really great help because I know that I should focus on these 2 models and not on others, and in the second part of the course.
The toolkit has informed what I personally have been doing in terms of course design, documentation and delivery. The challenge we face in dealing with adult foreign learners who are perhaps migrants or refugees or asylum seekers is that we have to work at the pace of individual learners rather than work to a very tightly specified syllabus leading to an examination, and in that way accommodate different learning styles and different learning preferences. This is where the toolkit can be valuable in perhaps suggesting additional activities to complement things that have already been introduced but need further reinforcement.
I use the GSE Teacher Toolkit to create curriculum learning objectives and map them to specific materials. I also use it to help create graduate skills profiles for students and map their progress to assessment opportunities. The GSE Teacher Toolkit is also helpful for curriculum literacy issues with teacher development programs, particularly with action planning and reflection.
The GSE Teacher Toolkit is a free online database which brings together sets of learning objectives for adults learning general English, professional English, and academic English, as well as learning objectives for young learners. Plus, an extensive database of grammar and vocabulary all in one place, and all mapped to both the Global Scale of English and the Common European Framework. Thousands of teachers around the world are already using it to save time and more accurately check levels, plan lessons, create classroom materials, and report on the progress of their students. To find out more about the GSE Teacher Toolkit and what it can do for you, please visit english.com/GSE.
Assalamualaikum, hello, and a very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Izzatul Hanizam binti Muhammad Tauzi, and I'm attached with the English Language Teaching Center, or ELTC, Ministry of Education Malaysia, and I will be your moderator for today. Thank you for joining our webinar today, which is part 1 in the Pearson-MELTA Webinar series of the 10th MELTA International Conference in English Education, or MERCEL Online 2020. Before we begin, allow me to make a few quick announcements regarding our session. Today's webinar will be carried out in 2 parts. The first part is the presentation by our guest speaker, and the second part will be followed by a Q&A session. The second announcement I'd like to make is everyone who attends the webinar will get a certificate of participation via a link that will be given at the end of the session. Kindly key in your full name and email address, and an e-certificate will be generated and emailed to you within 7 working days. Also, for some reason, if you miss any part of the webinar, this webinar is recorded, and the recording will be made available to everyone on the MELTA YouTube channel, as well as the Pearson website. For the Q&A session later, please send in your question through the Q&A chat. Please include your full name together with your question, as the chosen questions will receive a prize from Pearson. So please look out for that coming shortly. To begin today's session, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Ramesh Nair, President of Malaysian English Language Teaching Association, or MELTA, to present his welcoming remarks. Hello, Dr. Ramesh.
Hi, Izzatul. Thank you for your kind introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to webinar 1 of a 4-series webinar, which MELTA is proud to organize with Pearson. So I'd like to first start off by just thanking Pearson for its long-time support of the association. We are an association which strives to support the continuing professional development of teachers, and we typically run conferences every year, and Mike has been kind enough to join us in one of those conferences a few years ago, but the situation today is very different. And we have, we made the decision to go online. And in a way, this has been something which is positive, because we've had the opportunity to engage with a lot more people through these online platforms than we did when we ran the conference face-to-face. So thank you, Pearson, for your support. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Mike Mayer for making the time to join us today for this webinar. It's not just a matter of appearing here. Mike has put together an interesting presentation, which I hope will be an eye-opener for some of you, and an opportunity for you to think in greater detail about the CEFR. Mike, as you may know, our curriculum has undergone some reforms, and it is informed by the CEFR. So I think our teachers have a lot of questions, pertaining to the CEFR. So your presentation today is something that I think many of them are looking forward to. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the Special Projects Bureau of the Malaysian English Language Teaching Association, which is headed by Dr. Teh Peh Ling. The Special Projects Bureau is the bureau which is leading the webinar series. As I said just now, this is the first of 4 webinars running this month, and these webinars are in the run-up to an international conference scheduled for the 7th of November. So we hope that you will visit our website, the MELTA website, to learn more about the MELTA International Research Conference in English Language Education. Finally, I'd also like to thank the English Language Teaching Center of the Ministry of Education for their support in not just this webinar series, but also for co-hosting the MERSAL conference this year. And so with that, I would like to pass the session back to Izatul. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Dr. Ramesh. Next, allow me to introduce to you Ms. Chia Su Meng, who is the Senior Key Account Manager of PTE Academics, Pearson, Malaysia. And I would also like to invite Su Meng to say a few words. Su Meng?
Thank you, Izatul. Thank you, Izatul. And Dr. Ramesh, a big hand to you and your team for the hard work and effort in organizing the conference this year in such a bold and innovative way. Pearson is indeed delighted and honored to be the main sponsor for the inaugural online edition of the 10th MELTA International Research Conference in English Language Education. Well, more than 300 learners worldwide today have been affected by the coronavirus, and we educators have been battling to ensure that learning continues despite disruptions. While the pandemic has adversely impacted global learning communities, there is no denying that this crisis has spurred digital transformation and opened up new teaching and learning opportunities powered by technology. A case in point is how teachers from all over Malaysia and the Southeast Asian region are tuning in online today to the Pearson-MELTA webinars. Information sharing simplified. What a great upside. As MELTA's partner in learning, it gives me great pleasure to be here at the Pearson-MELTA webinars, realizing Pearson's mission of helping our teachers and learners make progress through learning and sharing. We hope you are as excited and motivated to engage with the speakers as they are to share their stories with you. With that, I will hand you over to Izatul to get the show on the road.
Thank you, Su Meng. Thank you, Dr. Ramesh. Ladies and gentlemen, the title of our webinar today is Global Scale of English, Helping Teachers put CEFR to Practice. It's a very interesting and a very relevant topic for ELT practitioners in Malaysia today. And we're very fortunate to have as our speaker today, Mr. Mike Mayer, the Director of Global Scale of English, Pearson, with us here today. Allow me to quickly tell you a little bit about Mike before I pass it on over to him. So Mike heads research that look into creating audience-specific learning objectives aligned to the global scale of English, which I'm sure many of us are somewhat familiar with in regards to the CFR. So Mike also works with content teams to ensure that the learning objectives created underpin all new products and services. He also works extensively around the world, helping educational institutions and ministries to use the global scale of English in curriculum designing and progress monitoring. Without further ado, we shall move straight on to the presentation because I'm sure everyone is very eager to hear what Mike has to share. Good afternoon, or should I say good morning, Mike, because I believe it's quite early in the day for you there. Thank you for joining us. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Izatul. And yes, it is 8:35 or something in the morning. It's a wet and windy and very cold London day. So I'm very happy to be welcoming some Malaysian warmth and sunshine into my home in South London. Thank you for joining me on this presentation. Obviously, I would prefer to be there in person, if only because it would be much warmer than it is here. But it's still a great pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to you today. And I hope we're going to have, you know, a great, informative and entertaining time over the next hour or so. So, Izatul, would you like me to just crack on with the presentation?
Yes, please do. I think they're eager and waiting for your presentation. By all means.
Okay, thank you. And don't go away, Izatul, because you know you have a role to tell me what people are saying in the chat box.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay,
yes.
Excellent. So thank you. As Dr. Ramesh said, I've presented, I think actually twice at your conferences in the past. and it is a pleasure to be here with you again, talking about the Common European Framework, the work that we at Pearson have done with the developers of the Common European Framework, and how we have developed the Global Scale of English to really help teachers put the Common European Framework into practice. So, as we say, without further ado, I'm going to advance. Hopefully my slides are advancing. Izatul, can you just nod and let me know that the slides are moving? Can you see my second slide? How are you feeling? Yeah. Okay, so all of you teachers out there, I know that CFR has now been introduced into Malaysia and into the broader Southeast Asian region. And this can be a little bit daunting at first. So I just wanted to get a sense of how confident you are at the moment in teaching and assessing using the CFR. So you've got a nice, easy multiple choice question, and you can type this into the Q&A box. You don't have to put your name. This is not a prize question. Are you feeling very confident, quite confident, not very confident, not confident at all? And Izatul is going to tell me what's appearing in the chat box. I'm just going to give you like 3 seconds because I have so much to tell you. So Izatul, what's coming in? Anything?
So far we have one from Anonymous, and she is saying they are very confident.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
I'm guessing all the people who are not quite so confident are not typing into the box, right? So anyway, one of my objectives for this presentation is really, if you're not feeling very confident, to make you feel a bit more confident in using Common European Framework. It is potentially quite academic, but what I want to show you is that the things that you actually need to know as a teacher are really not that complicated. And I should just tell you, even though this is an academic research project, this was created by teachers to help teachers. So this was created for you to make your lives easier. So that was the objective of the Common European Framework. Right. So I thought I'd start out by saying why I think this is a great idea that Malaysia is aligning its curriculum to the Common European Framework. And I think there are a number of reasons. And the first is it gives us a common language to use to describe learner proficiency. So when I was teaching in the 1980s, we just used really very general terms like beginner, intermediate and advanced. But if I said to you intermediate, what does that mean? I mean, your definition of intermediate is probably different to mine. Intermediate is such a broad area that it's really not very precise. So Common European Framework gives us more precision. As we move increasingly into a globalized world, we have to recognize that our students are increasingly moving between countries for education, for work, and so it really makes sense for us to have a global standard, not just for English language teaching, but actually for all educational qualifications, so that they are recognized in countries outside of Malaysia as well as inside of Malaysia. And this really was why the Common European Framework was created in Europe. People were starting to move around Europe for education and for work, and so the Council of Europe wanted to establish a standard so that somebody's level in Spanish as a foreign language could be compared to somebody's level in German as a foreign language, and everybody was speaking the same language. It is true to say that international qualifications that I'm sure a number of your students will be aiming to take are aligned to the Common European Framework. So if you're teaching using a different standard, it's more difficult to know if your students are ready to take these international qualifications. So that's another bonus. And if you have local and national qualifications that are also aligned, and if you have a curriculum that is also aligned, then it makes it easier for other countries to recognize your students' Malaysian qualifications. And again, this is what's happened in Europe, because as students move around, if they have a qualification from a German university, that can be recognized in Spain or France because it's aligned to the Common European Framework. So I think those are some of the benefits of aligning your curriculum. Just quickly, before we dive into the detail, what is the Common European Framework and what isn't it? So, as I said, it is a common language for describing learner proficiency, learner progress. As well as a proficiency scale, it's also at the heart a framework of learning objectives which describe what learners can do at different levels of proficiency. And this is the framework which should be used to inform your teaching and your assessment. And you're probably already starting to get familiar with the can-do statements of the Common European Framework. This is what I mean by the learning objectives. It's important to stress that the framework it describes itself as open and flexible. So this is something that you are free to adapt to your local context. It is not rigid. Okay, so there is potential to modify the framework for your local needs. And one of the key things about the Common European Framework and about the approach to language teaching is that it is something called action-oriented, which is just a very complicated way of saying learners have to be able to do something with the language. It's not they know grammar rules. It's not they know 1,000 words. Great. But what can they do with that language? They have to be able to communicate and to understand using the grammar and the vocabulary. And it really wants to focus on real world use of language. So it's thinking about learners who are interacting with each other in the real world, communicating in English. It is not a curriculum or a syllabus. It is not a set program of study. If you've looked in any detail at the framework, there is too much in the framework to teach in any one curriculum or syllabus. So you use it to create a curriculum or a syllabus. You are not expected to cover everything in the Common European Framework. And it is not a teaching methodology. It's not a teaching methodology, but at the same time, it was created at the time when the communicative approach to language teaching was becoming popular. And it is definitely a move away from a methodology that I learned French with, which was called audiolingual, which was basically listen, repeat, listen, repeat, listen, repeat, listen, repeat. That's all we did. This was a move away from audiolingual method. So it's about learners doing something with the language and not just focusing on grammar and vocabulary. And there we go. It was a move away from audiolingual. And also I know certain parts like in China and Japan, there was still a tendency to teach using grammar translation method. And so the Common European Framework really is a rejection of grammar translation methodology. And importantly, it is not an exam. And most people, when they think about Common European Framework, they think about the exams which are aligned to the Common European Framework. And this is because the exam organisations saw the potential of the Common European Framework before people creating materials and teachers. And I know, I've heard it from the people, the person who created the Common European Framework, that this is really disappointing for them because they wanted to create something for teachers to help them teach. And then you have to assess as part of teaching, but you're assessing because it informs what you're teaching. Their heart is really in the teaching. So a few implications of using the Common European Framework, and as I said, it's a framework of learning objectives. And one of the, I guess, easy things to implement with the Common European Framework is sharing these learning objectives with students. There are studies which show that if a learner knows why they are studying something, they have a better chance of achieving that particular learning objective. So if you're not doing it already, I would encourage you to share your learning objectives with your students. Obviously, if they're super young, this might not be possible and you may need to do it in local language, but make them aware of why they are doing something. And then make sure in your lessons that you have an opportunity to see whether or not your learners have mastered that learning objective. So you can only say that your learning objective has been achieved if most of your students can do the thing by the end of the class. And in order to know that, don't wait until the end of year exam. Every class should be a kind of not formal at all, but as a teacher, can I see, can I hear, can I read something which shows me they have understood what we've been teaching today? And if they haven't, you analyze why. Maybe they haven't understood the grammar, maybe they haven't understood the vocabulary. You will have to go back and reteach that or give it as homework to revise. So this is what we call formative assessment. So ongoing assessment, really informal in the classroom so that you are aware and your students are aware, yeah, you know what, we can do this, or we're still struggling. Let's not just move on. Let's try and master this before we move to the next thing. And then, as I mentioned before, action oriented. What can the learners do by the end of the lesson? And that is in the form of genuine communication. Not can they recite 10 words? Can they tell me the grammar rules? I've sat in classes where students recite the rule and then you move to an activity. They don't link the rule to what they're doing. That's something separate, and communication does not take place. And this is all based on making learning student-centered and engaging the students in the classroom, which, and the implication is you reduce teacher talking time. The class should not be about the teacher. The class should be about the students. So get them doing things. Obviously, you have to present. You will have to direct the class, but you can only learn the language by actually doing something with it, by engaging with it. And that's what the Common European Framework was trying to standardize in the language classroom. So, as I said, the Common European Framework was created for all languages in Europe, and because of that, it doesn't contain grammar and vocabulary. That is separate. You still need it. You still need to teach it. They are what we call the enabling skills. They enable you to do something in the language. You can't do anything without vocabulary. I used to write dictionaries, so I would argue that if you have vocabulary, you can do a few things. If you don't have grammar, It'll be difficult to understand you, but you could survive without grammar. But vocabulary, you need to know what the words are. You still need to teach grammar and vocabulary, but these are only tools which will help your learners do something in English. So what are these language functions that they can do? So for example, here's a can-do statement, can make suggestions about what to do using a few basic fixed expressions. You still have to teach the grammar for that. Let's go to the park. Why don't we go to the cinema? So you still need to teach them these grammatical constructions, and you will need to teach them some vocabulary, maybe activities, free time activities, interests, hobbies. But then you need to ultimately move to the action-oriented part and get them in pairs, in groups, to make suggestions to each other to do things after school. So that's kind of the format of your lesson. So how does the Global Scale of English help you to understand the Common European Framework? So this is the book. I'm sure not many people have read this book, and it is quite academic. It's a research paper, but it has become, the Common European Framework, really popular around the world. And when something becomes popular, it gets criticised. And what we've tried to do with the Global Scale of English is to address some of these criticisms and limitations that teachers were feeling and provide tools that will help them use Global Scale of English, and because of that, use Common European Framework. So just quickly, Common European Framework was created for adults. It was not created for primary students. It focuses mainly on general English. So if you're teaching academic English or business English, it's not really appropriate. Some of the skills, such as reading and writing, do not contain very many can-do statements, which makes it quite challenging. The levels, we'll see, take a long time to cover. There was no information when you first start language. Like the very first level of the Common European Framework already assumes you can do some things. And in some parts of the world, it takes a long time to get to that first level. And teachers found it really difficult to use Common European Framework in their day-to-day teaching. And by those teachers, I mean teachers in Europe. So these are the teachers who've had Common European Framework since 2001. They, 10 years later, were still struggling to know what to do with Common European Framework in the classroom. So, quick question. How many levels are there in the Common European Framework? Izatul, tell me what people are putting in the chat, if anything, or if it's just that one teacher typing again. You're on mute, so I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear you.
So sorry.
Okay.
They're pretty quiet now. No one has said anything. Maybe
very shy.
Yep.
Very shy teachers.
No, there's the 10-second delay. Can hang on here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. 6.
You're seeing 6.
Yes.
Okay. Very
5
good.
already answered. 6 all the way.
Oh, everybody's going 6. Very good.
3, yeah. Some with 3.
Yes.
6. And if you're thinking 6, these are the levels you're thinking of. A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. And they're
all saying 6, yep.
Okay, they're all saying 6. Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm feeling generous, so I'm going to give everybody half a point for that, because that's kind of true, but it's not completely true. Because actually, in the Common European Framework, there are 9 levels, and that's because A2, B1 and B2 are actually 2 levels. And I'm mentioning that because that is one of the details that's kind of important, and I'll explain why in the next couple of slides. So there are, remember those plus levels or upper levels, A2, B1, B2.
So if you look at the chart on the diagram on the screen, you can see we've got 3 learners there, number 1, number 2, number 3. Learner 1 and Learner 2 are described as being A2 on the Common European Framework, and Learner 3 is described as being B1. Now, if I just said that to you without this diagram, you would assume, I guess, that Learner 1 and Learner 2 are pretty much the same level, and Learner 3 is a higher level because they're B1. But actually, the move between A2 and B1 is a transition. It's not a step. And the truth, as you can see there, is Learner 2 is almost B1. They're at the top end of A2 and actually closer to Learner 3 in proficiency level. So just using A1, A2, B1, B2, it's quite a broad description. It's better than beginner, intermediate, advanced, but it's still quite broad, and this can create frustrations for learners, as we'll see, and it's not really helpful when you're trying to plan what to teach your students. So, okay, this is the technical bit. Don't anybody freak out by the numbers on the screen. So we have on the right-hand side of the screen the global scale of English. This is a proficiency scale from 10 to 90, as you can see, and it is against, again, you can see there the Common European Framework. On the left-hand side of the screen, you will see Common European Framework with some numbers called logits. I told you this was the academic part. Logits, and that comes from the research data. You don't have to understand the logits. What I want to show you is that those logits, Pearson took those logits and we converted them into the positive scale 10 to 90. Because telling a learner that their level is minus 3.23 is not very motivating. But we can tell the learner that their level is 30. And both of those, minus 3.23 and 30, mean, as a learner, you are at the very beginning of A2. And then we have 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, etc. within A2. So we can monitor progress more accurately using this numerical scale and still equate it to the Common European Framework. The thing I want you to remember, if you remember nothing else from this presentation, is the global scale of English and the Common European Framework are the same scale. They are based on the same original data. One is expressed in numbers, global scale of English. One is expressed in letters and numbers, Common European Framework. But they fundamentally are all based on the original research data. And at Pearson, we use the global scale of English and the global scale of English learning objectives to create our courses and to create our exams, our assessments, which are along the bottom of the screen. I should just say to you that everything I'm going to share with you in this presentation today is free for you to use, except this screen. This screen shows you the Pearson courses and the Pearson assessments that you can buy. Everything else, all the tools and resources I'm going to show you, are freely available online. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how, as a publisher, we're using the global scale of English to inform the teaching materials that maybe you use and to inform the assessments that also maybe you use. So how do we measure progress, and how long does it take to make progress on the Common European Framework? So I'm not going to even ask you to guess, because this could take us an hour. We've done research, and I'll show you where you can find the research. But to move from A1 to A2 for, let's say, a Southeast Asian learner can take up to 480 hours. And to move from B1 to B2 can take over 1,000 hours. So this was at the point I was making about using Common European Framework to measure progress is quite challenging, because if you look at how many hours you have in your academic year and how many hours there are on that screen, if your learners are in A1, they are going to be A1 for a number of years and B1 for quite a few years. And so that is a challenge for teachers and a challenge for motivating learners. So this was kind of an overview of the research. Don't worry, you don't need to read the whole slide. Basically, we look at two different types of learners. Learners who have a language which is very close to English, so probably a European language, and then learners who have a language which is quite a mother language, which is quite far from English. And I think that's where we would put, you know, the languages in Southeast Asia. So you're in the slow column. That doesn't mean slow in a derogatory way. It just means it will take students longer because it's different to English. So you can see those numbers, cumulative numbers, and if we look there, takes you around 1,500 hours to get to a B1 level. And so I was doing some reading about the expectations in Malaysia, and the PT3 exam which is taken, and the expectation is that this exam will align to B1 on the Common European Framework. So I did some research with the MELTA organisers and calculated the number of hours that learners would have before they took the PT3, assuming they start early in primary, and then homework as well. And so you can see that the number of hours currently available is around 1,500 hours. So this shows that that target of reaching B1 in time for the PT3 exam is achievable. This is not an unrealistic expectation. I've worked in countries where they have B2 as the goal. That is unrealistic, but I would say that setting B1 as the target for PT3 is an achievable aim. Now, 1,500 hours. This is classroom hours and homework. Obviously, if you can encourage your students to do more outside of the classroom, I know classroom hours are fixed, but if they can do more, and that doesn't need to be onerous work. So if they read in English, if they watch English TV, if they watch English films, this all goes towards the number of hours that they have had exposure to English. They can increase their chances of reaching that B1 level. So if we break this down to look at global scale of English, we talked about the number of hours it takes to make progress at A1 and B1 on the Common European Framework. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, we break that down for global scale of English and have estimated how long it would take to demonstrate 3 points progress on the global scale of English. So if you're at A1, say you're at 23 on the global scale of English, so to get to 26, could take you around 120 hours, which is much more achievable within an academic year, and you should be able to demonstrate to learners that they're making progress within those academic years. Just very quickly, the way in which we developed these learning objectives was by going to people like you. The research is all based on teacher reviews of learning objectives, teacher estimates of what level a learner would be able to do a particular learning objective. And we've used over 6,000 teachers around the world from more than 50 countries, including Malaysia. And we gather the data back, we crunch the data, and where there is over 80% agreement around the world, we add the learning objectives to our database. And when they don't agree, it's rejected. So all the information that we have created has been validated by over 80% of teachers around the world. And so before I mentioned that Common European Framework was for general English. So if you're teaching general English, then we've extended that further with hundreds more learning objectives, and you have the Global Scale of English learning objectives for adult learners. If you're teaching academic English, we have a set for academic study. If you're teaching business English, we have a set for professional purposes. And if you're teaching younger learners, so primary, lower secondary, we have a completely new set for those young learners. The reality of the young learner classroom is really quite different to an adult classroom, so the objectives reflect the type of things you will be doing in the younger learner classroom. All of these are divided into reading, speaking, listening, writing. They are grouped according to the Common European Framework levels, including the plus levels. And then they're subdivided by the Global Scale of English levels. So A2 plus, you've got 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, and then at 43, you move to B1. So those PDFs, they're all available on the website that I'll share with you, and you can use those and you'll see these lists of learning objectives which can be used for lesson planning and curriculum development. However, if you prefer a more digital tool, we've also created a toolkit, and if you were on for the presentation early, you will have seen a little promotion video about this toolkit, and I just want to show you in a bit more detail how you would use this. Before I move on, if you want to look at the left-hand side, the top left-hand box, you will see very excitingly that the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit is a finalist in the British Council's Innovation Awards. So it's in the category of Innovative Tools for Teachers, and we're a finalist, and we will find out if we are a winner on the 15th of October. So I want you all to cross your fingers for us in that award ceremony. So this database is, I think, the tool that you should be looking at. It's a one-stop shop. It has everything you need. Learning objectives, as I mentioned, Common European Framework doesn't have grammar and vocabulary. So we've created grammar and vocabulary aligned to Common European Framework and Global Scale of English for English. Remember, Common European Framework is for all European languages. So we were able to do it because we are just focusing on English. So this is what it looks like when you go into it, and you have to select, and for learning objectives, select the type of learner you're teaching, the approximate level, a skill if you want to focus on a particular skill. So here I've got young learners. They're at this kind of A1, A2 level. I want to teach writing. I click select, and I see a list of learning objectives, so can-do statements, which are appropriate to teach at this level of proficiency. So I have 26 of them. I can download the results and print them off if I want to share them with my colleagues or with parents or with the administrative staff at the school. You might want to use all of them. Unlikely, I would say. You probably want to select the ones you want to use, in which case you can just select those and then print them off, and you can print them off as a PDF with a QR code, which can also be used for sharing. And now we've introduced new functionality, so you can print off as a spreadsheet, which we find is easier, teachers find is easier for manipulating and cutting and pasting, and just a bit more practical. For grammar, we have this for adult learners. Again, select the level, select the category, grammatical category. So the example that the lady had in the video was looking at modal verbs for obligation, and at this high A2, low B1 level, we've got 7 possible learning objectives, grammar points that you could teach at this level. You can click for more information, and you'll see that we have examples of how the grammar is used, and we also link it to those functional learning objectives. So what are the things that you could do to contextualize the grammar within a real world task? Within grammar, if you see that particular icon, the little page icon, we've also included some free resources to help supplement your materials. So you can go in, if you're teaching about advice, giving advice, then we've got some worksheets that you can print off, just very simple, but maybe to remediate what your learners have not understood, or a bit of additional practice. So free resources for the grammar. And then the vocabulary area is divided into adult learners and young learners. And young learners is that like the primary area. So you have to select which type, again, approximate level, and all the vocabulary is divided by topic. And if you want, you could just select only nouns, only adjectives, only adverbs, etc. So as an example, here we've got learners at about an A1 level, and we want to look at activities and free time and describing daily routines. And so again, I find a selection of words that are appropriate at this level. I can listen to the pronunciation if you want to check the pronunciation in both British and American English. And I also have the definition from a Longman dictionary. I'm not sure if you can see behind me, but this was my first job at Pearson. I used to be the dictionary publisher, so I could spend the next 3 hours, if you want to stay, talking about vocabulary, but maybe not. And we have, yeah, examples. All of these come from Longman dictionaries, so they're appropriate to use with learners. Proficiency. How am I doing for time? Oh, quite badly. Okay, so proficiency. How do we assess proficiency, and what is it that we're assessing when we're looking at proficiency? So really, proficiency is a combination of 2 aspects of language. One is about how much. So how many of these learning objectives, how many of these language functions can a learner do? So that's one aspect of assessing proficiency. But then the other one is, how good can they do it? How well can they do it? How good is their English? And they both develop as you develop in proficiency. The number of things you can do increases, but the way in which you do them also increases. And so for this, we've made available a couple of assessment frameworks, again on the website, again free to download. And these really are answering the questions, what does speaking sound like at different levels of proficiency on the Common European Framework and on the Global Scale of English? So, okay, I'm new to the Common European Framework. I know it's A1, A2, but What is the difference between A1 and A2? How do I know if my students who are supposed to be A2, are they performing at the right level for A2? So this has been created by examiners for those international exams that report on Common European Framework. And so these are the things that they are looking for, the grammar, like the vocabulary, hesitation, pronunciation, fluency. So these are really a summary of the different levels on the Common European Framework. And as a development activity, you can look at these to get a better understanding of what does it mean if somebody says my students are A2. You can get an idea in your head of what that sounds like. That comes from experience, but by reading these and using these, I think you can increase your experience much more quickly. So, planning a lesson. I'm guessing planning a lesson is the thing that most teachers are going to be doing on this call. So how would I use the global scale of English resources to plan a lesson? And of course, I'm going to be using the Teacher Toolkit. And here's what I want to do. I've got a group of adult learners. They're at a low level. They're kind of the high end of A1. And I want to get them into A2, preferably into A2 plus by the end of the course. And in today's lesson, we're going to be doing something on directions. So here's my learner. They're kind of at the top of A1, so that's 28 on the global scale of English. And as I said, I want to get them to A2 plus, the middle of A2, so around 35 to 37. So the learning objectives and the teaching that I'm going to be doing is going to focus on 32 to 38. So if you look at the previous numbers, I'm not starting at 28 and I'm not finishing at 35. I'm starting a bit higher and I'm aiming a bit higher. And this relates to something known as the zone of proximal development. So this you don't have to understand in any detail, but if you want to impress your friends, you can start talking about ZPD, the zone of proximal development. What this really means is giving your learners the right amount of challenge to ensure that learning happens. If my learner's 28 and I keep giving them language functions which are at the 28 level, they will stay at 28. If my learner is 28 and I give them language functions which are at 45, they will struggle. That is too much challenge. So you really want to be moving into this zone of proximal development. So the next area, finding the right amount of challenge to keep them engaged, but not demotivate them. And if I'm planning my lesson, I want to think about the learning objective, I want to think about the grammar, and I want to think about the vocabulary. And the toolkit can help with all of these. So I've gone into my adult learners. I've selected roughly the level that we're looking at. I know I want to do speaking. And I know I want to do directions. This is optional. You don't have to put anything in this box, but if I do, it'll reduce the search results further. And I see that I've got 3 possible learning objectives that are appropriate at that level of proficiency. I'm going to select one, and within that learning objective information, I can see grammar that I might also need to teach. Maybe my learners already need it, but maybe I need to pre-teach it. So with that, I'm going to go to the grammar and I'm going to follow up, and I'm looking at prepositions. And I've got prepositions of movement, of place, of position. So I'm going to call those up as well and see what do we have in there. There's a worksheet. So maybe I can integrate this worksheet into my lesson, maybe not, maybe I'll give it as homework. up to you to decide. But you have some grammatical information. So we have the learning objective, going to be asking, I forget what it was, giving directions. I've got the grammar. Now I need some vocabulary. So again, I've selected adult learners. I'm going to choose the topic, which will be directions. And when I'm selecting vocabulary, my advice would be select a vocabulary range which is bigger than your target teaching range. That's because with vocabulary, this is a global view of vocabulary. Maybe your learners already know some of these words. So obviously you don't need to reteach the words they already know, but the words are ordered by frequency and by importance in language learning. So if you think they know the words at A2, if you think they know the words at A2, then move to the words at A2 plus. And maybe there's a couple in there they don't know. And then move to the words in B1. Don't go straight to C1 and C2 because that is less frequent and probably less useful. So I've selected the topic area directions. Maybe I just want to teach a particular part of speech. So here I've selected verbs. And you can see I've got a range of verbs which are useful for giving directions. So now I've got the basis of my lesson plan. I've got my lesson objective, which I'm going to share with the students so that they know what we're doing in this lesson. I've got my grammar. We're going to do prepositions of place and movement and some verbs in the imperative for giving instructions. And I've got an idea of the vocabulary that I'm going to pre-teach or check that they know. Then I have to create the activity. And I'm sorry, but that's the part you'll have to do yourself. That's where you can get creative, decide your own activity, go to your course materials and find activities in there. Maybe use that worksheet that we found. And then you've taught the vocabulary, you've taught the grammar, you've given the students the opportunity to practice, and then you want to give them some freer practice. So maybe in pairs or groups, they're going to give directions around their town. Tell me how you get to school from your home. OK, or give directions. How would I get to your home from school? You can then look at the assessment framework and get an idea of what should they be sounding like at A2. It will not be fluent. It will not be without any mistakes. It will not be without any hesitation. OK, so this is about getting a realistic view. At A2, you will be able to understand most of the words, and students will be speaking in connected sentences, and they will not just be giving isolated words and phrases. So again, through experience, you'll get to know this, but I think the assessment frameworks will help you get that knowledge a bit quicker. Now, we're doing okay. If I'm selecting a reading text, maybe you're doing a reading class, you want comprehension. How do I know a reading text is at the right level? And this is where I'm so disappointed that I can't see your faces, because this is an exclusive. I have never presented this to any teachers in the world before, because this was added to the teacher toolkit last week. Last week, is it last week or this week? No, this week, Monday, this week. So this is brand new, and it's very exciting because it's based on artificial intelligence. Oh, spot the difference. Can you see what is different in my toolkit now? And hopefully you've noticed that we have a new tab called the text analyzer. And so what this does, it allows you as a teacher to find a text. Maybe you go on the internet to find texts for your learners. You can input the text. You can give it a title because you might want to save it. And you will. So I've done an example here. I've found it was on the BBC website. It's about the US economy, so obviously quite high level. The text analyzer takes the text, it analyzes it, and then it will tell you what level of proficiency this text is appropriate for. So you can see this is quite high level. It's GSE 65 to 69, so a high B2 on the Common European Framework. What I then did with this text, because actually that's a bit high for my students, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to edit the text. And I edited it by making it a bit shorter. I looked at the vocabulary that's highlighted and made the words easier. I made the sentences shorter, the clauses shorter. I did it again and I managed to bring it down by about 7 or 8 points on the GSE. So now it's kind of the top of B1, the very low B2. So this is more appropriate for the level of students that I'm teaching. So as I say, this is absolutely hot off the press, as they say, brand new. Please go away, play with it, try a few of your texts. I hope this will be another great resource for teachers to use. So we're almost up at the 50 minutes that I was giving, so I just wanted to finish off with some top tips for integrating Common European Framework into your classroom. So the first one is obviously think about your lessons in terms of learning objectives. What is the goal of what you're trying to teach, and what will students be able to do by the end of the class or the end of the week? It may not be, you may need longer than one double period, but think in terms of learning objectives and make sure the lessons are action oriented. Make sure your students are doing something in English, and that's not just gap fill around grammar or vocabulary or learning lists of vocabulary. Do that, but make sure they are then able to do something with that language. Check the teacher toolkit to see if your learning objectives are at the right level. So if you are using a course book, check what that course book is teaching in a lesson, and then go into the teacher toolkit and see, is this an appropriate level for my students? Is it giving them the right amount of challenge? Remember that zone of proximal development. And integrate some formative assessment practices into the classroom. So this is informal assessment. The students do not know they are being assessed. You are observing as a teacher what's happening. You're noting mistakes, and then in the next lesson, you're doing something to remediate on those mistakes. And as I said, where appropriate, so maybe not, 5-year-old students, but where appropriate, share those learning objectives with the students so that they know what they're doing. It can have an impact on being able to achieve, and also I think an impact on motivating, and everybody's clear about what they're doing. And then finally, from the teacher perspective, become familiar with these assessment frameworks to give you a better understanding of what is it that people are saying. B1, I've got to get the students to B1. What does that mean? And it's quite hard. So you can look at the learning objectives. These are the types of things that students will be able to do. And this is how it will sound, and this is how it will read in written English once they're at that level. And just finally then, that is the website you need to go to. So you shouldn't even need to write it down, because english.com, hopefully that's an easy website to remember, and then /GSE, that will get you on the Global Scale of English page, where you can find the teacher toolkit, you can find the learning objectives PDFs, you can find the assessment frameworks. If you're interested in the research, you can find all the white papers and the research about grammar, vocabulary, learning objectives, how long it takes to make progress. It's all on that site. So I would invite you to explore that site. And that brings my presentation to an end. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mike. Okay. So I'm sure this shared to make many things clearer for everyone in regards to the global scale and CFR in general. Right, so we're going to move on to our Q&A session. And please remember that the chosen questions will receive a prize courtesy of Pearson.
There's the echo. Yeah, okay.
All right, so, okay, welcome back. All right, so as I mentioned, we're moving on to our Q&A session and have chosen 3 questions for you, Mike.
Okay, I hope you chose the easy ones.
Well, I tried to have a variety, so to say. All right, okay. So the first question comes from Ho, okay, and Ho actually asked 2 questions, so I kind of combined it because it's kind of related.
I think my contract says only 3 questions, you know.
This is 1.2 questions.
Okay.
All right, so Ho is asking, this is concerning the number of hours needed to attain the particular level.
Yeah.
And Ho asks, does it take into account the starting age of the learner? Because this is in light of the critical period hypothesis. And also, Ho is assuming that these hours are referring to the hours of formal instruction and not the total number of contact hours, since in Malaysia, and I'm sure everywhere around the world, we have learners who are in an English-rich environment, and we also have many who are not. So I think that's what Ho is asking regarding the type of learning hour that is related to these learning hours that is suggested. So you answer?
That's a great question. Thank you, Ho, for the questions, but they are related, so that's fine. And the first one, yes, you obviously know your research. So in all honesty, that research is based on adult learners. So there currently is not so much research around young learners and how many hours it takes to make progress for young learners. So you are absolutely right to call that out. This was based on adult learners. And it's based on a combination of other people's research and also some research that we did at Pearson. Obviously, these hours are ballpark, and there are so many factors which come into play, such as motivation. I mentioned the learner's first language, but also, Ho mentioned people being in an environment, an English-rich environment and a non-English-rich environment. Obviously, that plays a huge part. And the research is based on people in a non-English environment. Okay, so these are people, learning English in France, where they are surrounded by French all the time, but they have English instruction at school and then at homework. So it does relate to the number of hours relates to formal instruction. So instruction, yes, and I would say conscious study, so homework. But obviously, if you're in a rich environment, so if you are a second language speaker living in the UK or Australia or the US, you are going to make progress faster than if you are in your home country where there is no exposure to English. So yeah, great question. I would recommend that Ho goes to english.com/GSE and takes a look at the paper, the white paper. How long does it take to make progress? Where she will, he or she, I don't know, is Ho he or a she? I'm not sure. Will find more information about the details, yeah, of the research.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike. Okay, we're going to move on to the second question. This question comes from Mazlina, right? And Mazlina is asking, I believe she may be working with one of the education department, state education departments, because she's asking, teachers are especially focused on the summative assessment as they tend to measure students' achievement based on the end results. How do we tell teachers that formative assessment is more relevant or more real to monitor students' progress and achievement?
Another great question, thank you. Personally, I would say it's not one or the other. I think there is a place for both. So summative assessment is useful. It has its place. One of the problems with summative assessment is that you take the test, you get the results, and then nothing is done with that information. Right, so you often, it's at the end of an academic year, and then the next academic year you move to a different class, a different teacher, a different course book, maybe a different institution, and really it's almost like there's a stopping point and you start again. So that's one of the sort of limitations, but I think summative assessment does have its place. Formative assessment, so obviously, I'm not super familiar with your local schools, but I suspect a lot of teachers are doing it. They just don't know they're doing it. It's kind of a fancy label, a formal label that we put on actually what teachers do. So teachers are not just saying, okay, like get into pairs and ask each other questions about the weekend, and then the teacher goes and has a cup of coffee and doesn't listen or doesn't do anything, you know, to monitor what's going on. So monitoring and hearing that, oh, actually, they haven't. There's quite a lot of mistakes happening with the simple past. Maybe we should remediate. So personally, and again, without knowing your local context super well, I think teachers are probably doing it. What I think we need to encourage, and this is kind of my theory about why language learning and teaching goes wrong, is that, and I'm sure as teachers you can relate to this, it sometimes feels like you're on a conveyor belt of getting through the course materials, going, I've got to cover this academic year. They made a mistake here. I don't have time to correct that. We've got to move on to the next thing. So I think the important point is really getting them to think creatively about, okay, maybe you do have to cover another 20 things before the end of the year, but if they're making a mistake here, how do we remediate? And maybe that is through homework, through just like a little bit in the next class that's totally unrelated to what you're doing. But that's my theory, is why some people end up feeling I'm no good at English. It's because at some point they fell off the conveyor belt and nobody picked them up and put them back on. They just lost it at the basics and then they don't. So I'm not sure it's a perfect answer to the question. I think formative assessment is happening. They just don't label it. But the key thing is, what are you then doing with it? Like, do something with it. Don't just recognize the mistake like, okay, and now what? Yeah. And giving that feedback to the learner, I mean, again, it will depend on the age group, but, you know, make the learners aware. I mean, if they don't know they're making the mistakes, then they'll never learn. So make them aware, but scaffold and, you know, all the things that we do as teachers.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mike. I think I kind of agree with you that when we do talk to the teachers and we bring up the term formative assessment, and then we tell them, well, it's not anything that new. You're doing it. The questions
exactly.
you're doing.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, okay. It's just like, as you said, it's maybe labeled or termed a little differently, but it's nothing new. Teachers are doing it in the classroom. So I think that kind of like, okay, so the teachers are maybe a bit comfortable in knowing that fact that, okay, it's not something I totally don't know. I do know it, only it's just given a different.
It's called something different. Yeah, exactly.
Different, right. Okay. Yeah. The third question comes from B. Not sure if it's a man or a woman, but B asks or states, I am a strong believer that the 21st century learning and the CEFR are inseparable. However, some beg to differ. Could you please touch on this matter, please? So whether the 21st century learning and the CEFR are inseparable or not.
Ooh, you had to save that one till the end, didn't you? Okay, so I am with B in that I think 21st century skills are absolutely critical, and I've done a number of presentations on 21st century skills and how we should be integrating them into the curriculum, and how I personally believe that the language teaching classroom is one of the best places to integrate those skills, because 21st century skills, a lot of it is around, you know, communication, collaboration, teamwork. I mean, things that we just do as part of the language teaching classroom. So, you know, I think everybody needs to petition Dr. Ramesh to get me to come in person to Malaysia next year's conference, and we can do 21st century skills. Right. Is it 100% integrated into Common European Framework? It is. I think there's a lot of overlap. I think there's a lot of overlap because it's action oriented and it's about real world tasks, and 21st century skills focus on real world communicative needs. And actually in 2018, the Common European Framework published an additional volume of can-do statements, and one of the key focuses of that additional volume was something called mediation. So you can Google Common European Framework Companion Volume 2018 mediation, and a lot of that is around collaboration and teamwork. So in that respect, B is right. The Common European Framework and the 21st century skills are kind of integrated. Yeah. Okay.
All right. That's all we have. 3 questions, unless you'd like more.
I'd love to sit here all day and talk about them, but thanks for those questions. They were great questions, actually. So I'm very happy that I think we're giving some prizes for those questions, right? Because they were worthy of prizes. Yeah.
We are. So Ho, B, and Mazlina, hang on. Pearson will get in touch with you. Congratulations for your prizes. They'll contact you soon. Okay, so we've come to the end of the Q&A session. Thank you very much for all your questions, and we apologize that we are unable to take in any more questions due to time. But it was good to see all the questions that came up. I hope I didn't choose the 3 most difficult, but I thought that, you know, it was kind of the 3 that maybe a lot of people were asking or thinking about as well. Thank you, Mike, for answering the questions, and also a very big thank you for joining us today. We do hope to see you again for more sharing sessions. As you said, we'll try and get Dr. Ramesh to fly you in, okay, come rain or shine or coronavirus, okay? Hopefully everything will work itself out soon, and we'll be able to see you in person one day real soon. Before we leave, any last words from you, Mike?
No, just thank you again for having this opportunity to share what we've done with you. I hope you go away. I hope tomorrow when I look at the analytics, I see this sudden spike in usage of the GSE Teacher Toolkit in Malaysia, that everybody's gone just to check it out. It's free. You will never be charged for it. Use it, please, and check out the text analyzer. And yeah, thank you. Thanks again. Thank you to Dr. Ramesh. Thanks to Su Ming for inviting me, and I hope the rest of the Pearson-MELTA presentations go as swimmingly. And it's still raining in London, by the way.
Okay, thank you. I hope the weather clears up very soon, which I kind of doubt, but
yeah,
anyway, we can hope. We can hope. All right, yeah. Thank you again, Mike.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we go, I would like to invite Su Ming and Dr. Ramesh to say a few words. We'll begin with Su Ming. Take it away, Su Ming.
Thank you, Izatul. Thank you, Mike, for the valuable insights and information about the new developments. They're really hot off the stove. Hope we've kept you warm with our Malaysian hospitality. I believe I would like to put my name down to get you to Malaysia in person next year. I would like to say great questions from our participants. You will definitely love your prize. We're giving you great, I would say, some of our best sellers with teachers' books. Okay, so you'll love them. Now, final words. We hope you have thoroughly enjoyed and benefited from Mike's session. Both Pearson and MELTA look forward to having you join us for the upcoming webinars for more exciting sharing and great prizes lined up for each webinar. At Pearson, we really want you to feel supported, feel inspired, and as you've heard, Mike is really inspiring, and we've got so many more speakers who are coming up, in upcoming webinars. Please know that there are plenty of resources at hand to help you to be ready to move forward. So do join our Pearson ELT teacher community. Here's wishing you all the very best in your journey of learning and transformation ahead. Keep learning and keep teaching. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. Over to you, Dr. Ramesh.
Thank you, Mike. As always, your presentations, they come across really clear, and I'm sure the teachers today are leaving this session with a much clearer idea of what the CEFR is about, and that teacher toolkit is something that, well, I will certainly want to look at in more detail, and I think MELTA will share this information with our members, right? And I think it's something that any kind of tools are going to be helpful to teachers in helping them make sense of the CEFR and support them in the classroom practices. So thank you for that very enlightening and engaging session. I only wish that technology was better at helping make the sessions more interactive, but that's something maybe that we will have to think about in future events. But thank you so much, and thank you, Izatul, for a great job. I think the questions that you chose at the end were really excellent questions. Yeah, it really, I think, captures some of the major concerns that our teachers have at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Su Ming, and thank you again, Dr. Ramesh. Ladies and gentlemen, we have really come to the end. I think I've said it a few times, I believe we've come to the end. But before we go, I would like to display on the screen again the QR code for anyone who did not have the chance to access the QR code for your e-certificate. I will also be putting up the QR code and link for a survey. We would really appreciate your help if you could help fill in the survey and give us feedback in regards to what we can do to further improve our content. So I'll put up the QR codes for a while for everyone to access. Okay, this is the QR code for your e-certificates. Please remember to fill in your full name and email address, and your e-certificates will be sent to you within 7 working days. So I'll leave it up for a few seconds to a minute. Okay. I'll move on to the next slide, but it's the same QR code, but it also has the QR code for the survey. So if you could please, everyone, help fill up the survey as well. Okay, so also please remember that the recording of the entire session will be made available to you. You can have access to it via the MELTA YouTube channel as well as the Pearson website. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank our wonderful speaker today and to the viewers for joining us, and we hope that you're able to take away a lot of useful information and ideas and take them back with you into your classrooms. Please look out for more webinars with Pearson and MELTA, which they're organizing on other topics related to education with more distinguished guest speakers. Do check them out and mark them down in your calendars. This is Izato signing off. Have a good weekend, stay safe, and goodbye.